March 14th, 1944. 6:47 a.m. Anzio, Italy. Cade Hollister lay motionless in a shell crater 200 yards from German lines. 20 years old, Kentucky coal miner, United States Army scout. 5 enemy spotters had him triangulated. 3 MG-42 machine gun nests waited for movement. The morning sun climbed behind him, casting his shadow forward across broken ground. In the next 4 hours, he would eliminate 12 men without firing a single shot, using a technique his own officers had explicitly forbidden him to use just 2 days earlier. The technique had a name: shadow linking. What it meant, where it came from, and why the army banned it, is a story that begins not in Italy, but in the darkness beneath eastern Kentucky. Harlan County, Kentucky, 1934. Population, 11,000. Most of them underground. Coal towns press close to the earth. The mountains lean in. The valleys run narrow. The sun disappears behind ridges at 3 in the afternoon every winter. If you didn't work the mines, you either left town or you hunted. Cade Hollister's father worked the mines. His uncle worked the mines. His grandfather had died in the mines, crushed when a timber gave way in a shaft that should have been reinforced but wasn't because the company said it cost too much. By age 10, Cade was underground too, not digging, running messages between shaft crews in darkness so complete you could forget the sun existed. The older miners carried carbide lamps, flames that danced and threw shadows against wet rock, flames that marked their position, announced their presence, ruined their night vision the moment they stepped into unlit passages. Cade never carried a lamp. The other runners thought he was showing off, trying to prove something. A 10-year-old kid navigating mile-long tunnels in pitch darkness without light. His father thought it was arrogance. "You'll get yourself killed with that pride, boy. One wrong turn and they'll find you 3 days later when the smell gets bad enough." But Cade wasn't being arrogant. He was learning to see without eyes. He navigated by sound. The drip of water meant limestone ceiling, stable and old. The creak of timber meant pressure building, stress on support beams that might hold or might not. The scrape of boots told him which crew was where, how many men, whether they were working or resting. He learned the smell of different rock faces. Shale smelled like wet metal. Coal dust had a sharp, chemical bite. Fresh-cut timber smelled sweet, like the forest still lived inside it. He learned to feel air movement. A draft from the left meant a ventilation shaft. Still air meant dead end. A breeze that smelled like the surface meant an exit shaft somewhere ahead. He memorized every turn, every junction, every passage that led somewhere, and every passage that led nowhere. Not by sight, by sound, by smell, by the way air moved against his face in absolute darkness. The miners stopped thinking he was showing off the day the tunnel collapsed. November 4th, 1934, 2:17 p.m. Shaft 9, eastern section, 300 yards deep. Cade was running a message to a crew working a new vein when he heard it. Not the collapse itself. He heard what came before the collapse. The sound of timber under too much stress. A groan that started low and built higher. The kind of sound that meant you had maybe 10 seconds before everything came down. Cade ran. Not toward the exit, toward the crew. "Out, now! Timber's failing!" 6 men looked up from their work, saw a 10-year-old kid screaming at them in the lamplight. They hesitated. The timber didn't. The ceiling came down with a sound like God slamming a door. Rock and coal and timber crashing down in a roar that deafened. Dust so thick it choked. Lamps blown out by the pressure wave. Absolute darkness. Absolute silence. Then coughing. Someone crying. Someone praying. Cade's voice, steady in the dark. "Everyone stay still. Don't move. Don't light the lamps. I'll get us out." "Kid, we can't see a damn thing." "I know. I don't need to see." For the next hour, Cade guided 6 men through a maze of side passages in pitch darkness. Passages he'd memorized months before while the crews worked. Passages that connected to ventilation shafts. Shafts that led to maintenance tunnels. Tunnels that led to older sections. Sections that led to emergency exits. He called out every turn, every step, every low ceiling and loose rock. 3 steps forward, turn left, duck your head, there's a beam at 6 feet. 20 paces straight, then right, floor slopes down, watch your footing. Stop. Smell that? Fresh air. Exit shaft is 30 yards ahead. They emerged into daylight at 4:32 p.m. 6 men who should have died. 6 men who lived because a 10-year-old kid had learned to navigate by sound and smell and the feel of air in darkness. Cade's father was waiting at the shaft entrance. He looked at his son, looked at the 6 miners covered in coal dust and blood, looked back at his son. "You saved them." "Yes, sir." "By refusing to use a lamp." "Yes, sir." His father was quiet for a long moment. "I was wrong. It's not pride, it's skill. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Cade Hollister learned something that day. Sometimes the conventional way isn't the best way. Sometimes refusing to follow the standard procedure saves lives. He would remember that lesson 10 years later, in Italy, when army doctrine was getting men killed. December 7th, 1941. Cade was 17, working a shift in Shaft 12 when word came down that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. He came up from the darkness at shift change, covered in coal dust, hands black, face black, only his eyes showing through. The foreman was listening to the radio in the office, Roosevelt's voice crackling through static. A date which will live in infamy. Cade stood in the doorway listening. The foreman looked up. "War's coming, boy." "I know. You thinking about enlisting?" Cade looked back at the mine shaft, at the darkness he'd spent 7 years navigating, at the life his father lived and his grandfather died living. "Yes, sir. Soon as I turn 18. "Your father know?" "He will." June 1942. 3 days after his 18th birthday, Cade walked into the recruiting office in Lexington and signed his name. The recruiting officer looked at his file, looked at Cade. "Says here you've been working mines since you were 10. "Yes, sir." "Night runner, no lamp, navigated by sound." "Yes, sir." The officer stamped approved and pointed toward the door. "Infantry, Fort Benning, report for basic training in 2 weeks. We'll make a soldier out of you." By November, Cade was learning to kill people instead of saving them from cave-ins. Fort Benning, Georgia, night training exercises. The instructors noticed something unusual. While other recruits stumbled through darkness with flashlights, tripping over roots and crashing into trees, Cade Hollister moved like he could see. He couldn't. He just knew how to listen. The sound of boots on different surfaces. Grass whispered. Gravel crunched. Mud sucked. Each sound told him what the ground ahead looked like. The sound of breathing. How many men. How close. Whether they were resting or alert. The sound of equipment. Metal on metal. Canvas rustling. The distinctive click of a rifle bolt. After 3 weeks, the instructors pulled him aside. "Hollister, you're wasted as regular infantry. We're making you a scout." "What's a scout do, sir?" "Gets close to the enemy, observes, reports back, stays alive doing it." "Sounds like mine work, sir. Just with people trying to kill me instead of rocks trying to crush me." "Exactly." By January 1944, Cade was in Italy with the 3rd Infantry Division, part of the Anzio beachhead that was supposed to break the German defensive line. It didn't. Anzio, Italy, January 1944. 36,000 Allied troops pinned on a coastal strip 6 miles deep, surrounded by German artillery positions in the Alban Hills. Every movement drew fire. Every position was pre-sighted. Men died fetching water. The problem was German spotters. They worked in pairs, sometimes trios, positioned in ruins and tree lines with radio equipment and binoculars. When they saw Allied troop movement, they called in artillery coordinates. The shells arrived 90 seconds later. A company would move up to assault a position. Before they covered 50 yards, German 88s would bracket them with precision that seemed impossible. February 8, 1944. Cade watched a platoon from Baker Company get caught in the open during a probe towards Cisterna. The spotters called it in from a bombed-out farmhouse 400 yards north. 42 men went down before they could reach cover. Cade knew 3 of them from the same transport ship crossing the Atlantic. Private James Doherty from Tennessee, Talked about his girl back home who made the best peach cobbler in the state. Corporal Vincent Palmieri from New Jersey. Quiet guy. Read books. Wanted to teach high school after the war. Sergeant First Class Robert Hutchkins from Oregon. Promised Cade he'd teach him to fly fish when they got home. Said the Deschutes River had trout that would break your heart, they were so beautiful. All three dead in the dirt at Cisterna, because German spotters had eyes on the battlefield and radios to call death down from the hills. Cade requested permission to hunt the spotters. His lieutenant, a West Point graduate named Thaddeus Bradford from Connecticut, denied it. "We need you for reconnaissance, not revenge missions, Hollister." "It's not revenge, sir. It's problem-solving. The problem is being solved. Sniper teams handle spotters. That's doctrine. You observe and report. Clear?" "Yes, sir." But it wasn't clear, and the problem wasn't being solved. February 16th, 1944. A sniper team tried to eliminate a spotter nest in the ruins of a church tower near Campalone. The lead sniper was a quiet kid from Minnesota named Anderson, 22 years old. Could hit a man at 800 yards in a crosswind. He got into position at dawn, waited for the shot, took it, hit the spotter center mass. The man collapsed. Anderson smiled. Then the second spotter, hidden in the bell tower's shadow, radioed coordinates. Anderson's position was obliterated by a mortar barrage 30 seconds later. They found pieces of him scattered across 40 feet. Cade requested permission again. Bradford denied it again. "Doctrine is clear, Hollister. Sniper teams handle spotters. We don't send scouts on elimination missions. This discussion is over." That night, Cade sat in his tent and stared at a map of the German positions. The spotters weren't just killing men, they were killing any chance of breaking out of Anzio. As long as they could call in accurate fire, every Allied advance would end in slaughter. The snipers couldn't get them. Too exposed, too obvious. Artillery couldn't suppress them. The spotters relocated constantly. Airstrikes were too imprecise. Might hit the church tower, might not. Someone needed to get close. Cade had been working on something. Not officially, not with permission, just a technique he'd been developing during night patrols, based on how he'd navigated mine shafts as a kid. He called it shadow linking. The idea was simple but insane. Instead of hiding from the enemy, you moved in their blind spots by tracking their attention patterns. You became part of their environment, a shadow that existed at the edge of their awareness but never quite resolved into a target. It required memorizing where spotters looked and when, how often they swept sectors, when they adjusted binoculars, when they reached for radio equipment. You had to map their pattern the way Cade used to map tunnel sounds. Then, move in the gaps between their observations. Not when they weren't looking. That was impossible to predict. But when their attention was committed elsewhere. Focused so completely on one sector that their peripheral awareness collapsed. He'd tested it on 4 patrols. Each time, he'd gotten within 100 yards of German positions that were supposed to be impenetrable. Once, he'd been so close to a machine gun nest, he could hear the gunner complaining about the cold. He'd marked their positions, reported back, watched as artillery plastered the coordinates he'd provided. On his last patrol, Cade had gotten within 30 feet of a German spotter team before returning undetected. He wrote up a report, 47 pages explaining the technique. Handed it to Lieutenant Bradford. Bradford read it twice, then called Cade into his tent. "This is insane." Bradford set the report down on his field desk. His jaw was tight. "You're describing stalking techniques, not reconnaissance. You're talking about getting close enough to German positions to count the buttons on their uniforms." "It works, sir. It violates every principle of scouting doctrine. You're supposed to observe and report, not infiltrate enemy positions like some kind of assassin. The positions I observed last week are the ones we destroyed with artillery. 20 Germans dead, no American casualties." Bradford stood up, paced, came back. "Hollister, I'm not questioning your results. I'm questioning your methods. What you're describing requires getting so close to enemy positions that one mistake means capture or death. We can't afford to lose scouts." "We're losing entire squads, sir. Drummond is dead. Anderson is dead. Doherty, Palmieri, Hutchkins, all dead because spotters call in fire we can't stop. And if you get killed trying this shadow link technique, we lose our best scout and gain nothing. Then I won't get killed. Bradford stared at him. I'm making this clear, Sergeant. You are forbidden from attempting this technique. That's a direct order. You will continue standard reconnaissance patrols, and you will not, under any circumstances, attempt to close within 100 yards of enemy positions. Understood? Cade understood. He also understood that men would keep dying. March 3rd, 1944. An entire squad got pinned down trying to clear a German observation post on Hill 73. The spotters, positioned in a network of 3 connected positions, called in artillery that killed 7 men in 4 minutes. The squad leader was Staff Sergeant Leo Drummond from Alabama, 32 years old, farmer, talked about his apple orchard, about his wife, about planting more trees when he got home. Cade had shared a foxhole with Drummond 3 weeks earlier during a particularly bad shelling. Drummond had talked for 2 hours straight, not because he was scared, because talking about the farm made the war feel further away. You ever been to Alabama, Hollister? No, Sergeant. Got the best soil in the world. Grows anything. I got 20 apple trees now. Plan to plant 40 more after the war. Maybe peaches too. You like peaches? Yes, Sergeant. You come visit after this is over. I'll teach you to graft. It's like magic, watching a tree take. Drummond died on Hill 73, calling for a medic who couldn't reach him. His last words were about apples. That night, March 3rd, 1944, Cade sat in his tent and looked at his map. 5 spotter positions marked in red, 5 positions that had been particularly deadly over the past month. He pulled out his 47-page report, the one Bradford had forbidden him to act on. He read it cover to cover. Then he looked at the map again. Bradford was right about one thing. One mistake meant death. But doing nothing meant more Drummonds, more Andersons, more men dying because spotters could call down fire with impunity. Cade made a decision. March 14th, 1944. 6 a.m. He loaded his pack, trench knife, 2 canteens, map marked with 5 spotter positions. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, didn't file a patrol report. He just walked into no man's land, carrying a weapon he'd been ordered not to use. A technique called shadow linking, forbidden by his own officers, about to eliminate 12 men in 4 hours, and change the way the United States Army fought wars. The first position was a collapsed barn 300 yards northwest of American lines. Cade had been observing it for a week. 2 spotters worked in rotation, one watching Allied positions through binoculars, while the other monitored radio equipment. They had a schedule. Every 14 minutes, the watcher would hand off the binoculars and they'd swap roles. During the handoff, there was a gap, 6 seconds, when both men were focused on the equipment exchange, neither watching their sectors. 6 seconds. Cade had timed it 17 times over the past week, never varied by more than 2 seconds. He crawled through a drainage ditch filled with 3 inches of water that smelled like sewage and death. The sun rose behind him, casting his shadow forward, but he timed his approach for when the spotters would be looking west into the glare. He moved during their radio checks. When static crackled and one spotter would adjust frequencies while the other wrote in a logbook. Sound masking, another trick from the mines. You moved when the timber creaked, so the sound of your boots got lost in the general noise. It took him 90 minutes to cover 200 yards. Elbows and knees, face in the mud, breathing through his mouth to avoid making noise through his nose. The cold water soaked through his uniform. His elbows ached from dragging his weight. His shoulders burned from keeping every movement controlled. At 7:53 a.m., he was 20 feet from the barn's collapsed wall. He could hear their conversation. One of them was complaining about coffee. The other was talking about a girl in Munich. Her name was Greta. She worked in a bookshop. She wrote him letters that smelled like lavender. The German's voice was soft when he talked about her. Young, maybe 23. Homesick. Cade waited. At 8:07 a.m., the radio crackled with an incoming transmission. Both spotters turned to the equipment. Cade moved. He covered 20 feet in 4 seconds, coming through the gap in the wall low and fast. the trench knife already in his hand. The first spotter turned his head at the last moment, his mouth open to shout. Cade's knife caught him under the jaw, angled upward. The blade severed the screen before it could form, cut through soft tissue and into the brainstem. The man's eyes went wide. Blue eyes, the same color as Cade's father's, then empty. The second spotter reached for his rifle. Cade yanked the knife free. Arterial spray painted his face hot and wet. He drove the blade into the second man's throat before the rifle cleared its resting position. Both dead in 8 seconds. No shots fired, no radio transmission, just silence. Cade stood in the barn, breathing hard, hands shaking, not from fear, from crossing a line he couldn't uncross. He'd killed men before, in combat, from a distance, calling in artillery coordinates, directing fire. But this was different. This was close. This was personal. This was looking into a man's eyes and watching the light go out. He dragged both bodies into the barn's cellar and covered them with debris. Took their radio equipment and smashed it with the butt of his knife. Components scattered, vacuum tubes shattered. Then he marked the position on his map and moved to the next target. 1 down, 4 to go. Position 2 was a German observation post in a grove of olive trees 600 yards east. 3 spotters here, more sophisticated equipment, better positioned, overlapping fields of observation. Cade spent 2 hours watching their pattern from a shell crater 400 yards out. They operated in overlapping sectors, one watching north, one watching south, one coordinating with artillery batteries via radio. Every 20 minutes they rotated positions. That was the gap. That was when their attention collapsed inward, when they were focused on each other instead of the landscape. Cade waited until the rotation, then he moved, using the olive trees as cover, advancing in 5-yard sprints, timed to the wind rustling through branches, sound masking again. In the mines, you moved when the air moved, when ventilation shafts created drafts that whistled through passages. The whistle covered the sound of your boots on stone. Here, the wind moved through olive branches with a sound like ocean waves. Constant, rhythmic, predictable. Cade moved with the wind. Sprint, freeze, let the wind cover his movement. Sprint again. The ground was uneven, rocky. Each step had to be calculated. One loose stone and the sound would give him away. At 11:34 a.m., he was in the grove. The spotters were 10 feet away, arguing about artillery coordinates for a target they'd identified. One of them gestured at a map. The others leaned in to look. Cade came from behind. First spotter, kidney shot from behind. The blade punched through the lower back at an upward angle, into the renal artery. The man's legs buckled. He went down without a sound. Shock too profound for screaming. Second spotter turned at the movement, saw Cade, reached for his sidearm. Cade's knife took him in the carotid. The blade opened the artery. Blood sprayed across the olive tree behind him in an arc that caught the sunlight. Third spotter was younger, maybe 19. He was saying something in German, fast, panicked. Cade heard 2 words clearly, Mutter, and Dresden, mother. Dresden. The kid was talking about his mother, how she lived in Dresden, how he needed to get home to her, how the war was almost over and he just needed to survive a little longer. Cade drove the blade between his ribs, found the heart, twisted. The kid's eyes went wide, his mouth opened, blood came out instead of words. He died thinking about his mother in Dresden. Cade stood among 3 corpses in an olive grove, blood on his hands, blood on his uniform, blood soaking into the soil. He felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. He felt like he wasn't Cade Hollister from Kentucky anymore. He was something else, something colder, something necessary. The kid had been thinking about his mother, but that kid could call in artillery coordinates that would kill 42 men, like the ones who died at Cisterna. Age didn't matter. Mothers didn't matter. What mattered was stopping the killing, even if it meant more killing. Cade smashed the radio, marked his map, moved on. 2 down, 3 to go. Position 3 was the most exposed, A two-man team in a ruined pillbox on Hill 73, the same position where Drummond had died. This one was harder. The pillbox had clear sight lines in all directions, no drainage ditches, no olive groves, just 400 yards of open ground with scattered rubble for cover. Cade studied it from a crater 200 yards out. The spotters were visible through the pillbox's observation slit, two silhouettes against the darkness inside. They swept binoculars across the Allied lines every 30 seconds. Methodical, disciplined, no obvious gaps in their pattern, but they had to eat. Everyone had to eat. Cade waited. The sun climbed higher. The heat built. Sweat ran down his face. His throat was dry. He'd finished one canteen, had one left. At 1:47 p.m., one of the spotters set down his binoculars and unwrapped something. Bread, probably, or canned meat. The second spotter continued scanning, but now he was doing the work of two men. His sweeps became faster, less thorough, trying to cover twice the area in the same time. That was the gap. Cade moved during those faster sweeps. When the spotter's eyes were racing across sectors instead of studying them, he crawled, elbows and knees, face in the dirt. The sun was high and hot. Sweat ran into his eyes, burning. He couldn't wipe it away, couldn't move his hands, had to keep them planted, supporting his weight. His shoulders burned from the strain of moving so slowly, of keeping every movement controlled, deliberate. One wrong move and the spotter would see him. One moment of carelessness and machine gun fire would chew him into pieces. He moved 6 inches at a time, using rubble piles as anchor points, memorizing the spotter's sweep pattern, north to south, 20 seconds, south to north, 20 seconds, back to north, 20 seconds. During each sweep, Cade advanced 6 inches. 400 yards became 300. The ground was hard, rocky. Each movement scraped his elbows raw through his uniform. He could feel blood mixing with sweat. 300 became 200. His legs were cramping, his back screaming. He wanted to stand, to stretch, to run. He stayed flat. 200 became 100. At 2:31 p.m., he reached the pillbox's blind spot, a collapsed section of wall on the eastern side. He could hear them talking inside. One was complaining about the heat. The other was saying something about a girl back in Cologne, how she worked in a factory, how he was going to marry her after the war. Cologne. Different city, same dream, same hope that the war would end and life would begin. Cade circled to the entrance, moving along the wall so slowly it took him 4 minutes to cover 12 feet. At the entrance he paused, listened. One spotter was chewing, the other was adjusting radio dials. Cade went in fast. The first spotter turned, eyes wide, hand reaching for a Luger on the table. Cade's knife punched through his sternum. The blade found the heart. The man's eyes went from wide to empty in 2 seconds. His hand fell away from the Luger, never touched it. The second spotter dropped his food, grabbed for his rifle. Cade yanked the knife free, threw it. The blade tumbled once, buried itself in the spotter's throat. He collapsed, gurgling, hands clawing at the handle, blood pouring down his uniform. Cade walked over, pulled the knife out. The spotter's eyes followed him, still alive, still aware, drowning in his own blood. It took 20 seconds for him to die. Cade knelt on the pillbox floor, breathing hard. There was blood here that wasn't from the two Germans. Older blood, dried, dark, American blood, Drummond's blood. Cade could see where Drummond had fallen, could see the spray pattern on the wall where he'd been hit. Could imagine him lying here, calling for a medic, thinking about apple trees. "I did it, brother," Cade whispered. "No more deaths here, not from this position." He destroyed the radio, marked the map, 3 down, 2 to go. But he was exhausted, his hands were shaking, his shoulders felt like they were made of broken glass. His elbows were raw and bleeding. He needed to rest. He couldn't rest. 2 positions left, both visible from each other. If one team saw movement near the other position, they'd radio a warning. German infantry would swarm the area. He had to wait for dark. Cade spent the next 4 hours in a shell crater halfway between the 2 positions. He couldn't move, couldn't risk being seen, just had to wait. The sun crawled across the sky. The heat was brutal. He finished his second canteen. His mouth felt like sand. He thought about Drummond's apple orchard, about Greta in Munich and her letters that smelled like lavender, about the kid from Dresden who'd never see his mother again. He thought about the 42 men at Cisterna, about Doherty and Palmieri and Hutchkins, about Anderson scattered across 40 feet, about every man who died because German spotters called down fire. He thought about the men who would die tomorrow if he failed. The sun set. At 6:22 p.m., twilight came to Anzio. Cade moved toward the farmhouse, position 4. He used shadow linking, adapted for twilight, tracked where the spotters directed their attention by watching the glow of their cigarettes. When the ember brightened, they were inhaling. Eyes closed for a fraction of a second, night vision compromised by the glow. When it dimmed, they were scanning. Cade moved during the brightening, during those micro gaps. At 8:04 p.m., he was inside the farmhouse. 2 spotters, both tired, both careless. One was asleep in a corner, snoring softly. His rifle leaned against the wall, out of reach. The other was monitoring radio traffic with his back to the door, headphones on, writing in a logbook. Cade killed the sleeping one first, hand over mouth, blade across the throat. The man never woke up properly, just went from sleep to death without the transition of consciousness. Then the radio operator. Cade's hand clamped over the man's mouth from behind. The knife went in at the base of the skull, severed the spinal cord. Instant death. The man went limp in Cade's arms. Both died without knowing they were dying. Cade stood over the second body, the one who'd been monitoring the radio. He was young, maybe 22. Cade didn't search his pockets, didn't want to know about letters or photographs or girls waiting back home. He didn't destroy this radio. Instead, he used it, keyed the microphone, transmitted random static for 30 seconds. Just noise, no pattern, no meaning. Then went silent. At the tree line position, the 5th spotter team would be listening, trying to figure out why their sister position had just transmitted nonsense. They'd be confused, distracted. Perfect. Cade left the farmhouse and moved toward the tree line. He could see the spotters now. 2 silhouettes, backlit by a small lamp inside their position. They were arguing, voices rising. One was saying they should check on the farmhouse. The other was saying it was probably just radio malfunction. Equipment failed all the time. Neither of them was watching their sectors. Cade covered 400 yards in 18 minutes, moving through darkness that felt like home, like the mine shafts of his childhood, like the place he belonged. The darkness wrapped around him, protected him, made him invisible. At 8:47 p.m., he reached their position. A camouflage tent tucked into the trees. The spotters were still arguing. One had a map spread out. The other was fiddling with radio equipment, trying to raise the farmhouse, getting no response. Cade came through the tent flap like a shadow. They looked up, saw him. One reached for a rifle, too slow. Cade's blade opened his throat from ear to ear. Arterial spray doused the lamp. Darkness. The second spotter lunged for the tent entrance. Cade caught him from behind, one hand over the man's mouth, the other driving the knife up under the ribs at an angle, finding the heart from below. The spotter convulsed, went still. Cade held him for 5 seconds, felt the life leave, then lowered him to the ground. 5 positions, 12 spotters, 0 shots fired. He dragged both bodies into the underbrush, smashed the final radio. Then he sat down on the ground, back against a tree, let the exhaustion hit him. His hands were shaking. His uniform was soaked with sweat and blood. His shoulders felt like they were made of broken glass. His elbows were raw meat. He'd done it. Proven that shadow linking worked. Proven that one man moving in blind spots, tracking attention patterns, could eliminate positions that conventional tactics couldn't touch. But he'd also violated a direct order. Bradford would have him court-martialed, assuming he made it back. The walk back to American lines took 3 hours. Cade moved slowly, too tired to be careful, following instinct more than planning. His legs felt like lead. Each step was an effort. His vision was blurring at the edges. He'd been operating for over 14 hours. No food, no water, just adrenaline and willpower. At 11:53 p.m., he stumbled into the perimeter wire. A sentry challenged him. "Halt, password." Cade's mind went blank. He couldn't remember the password. Couldn't remember anything except killing 12 men. The sentry raised his rifle. "I said password, soldier, or I drop you right here." Hollister. Cade Hollister. Scout. 3rd Infantry. The sentry lowered his rifle slightly, squinted in the darkness. "Jesus Christ, Hollister, you look like hell. Where you been?" "Patrol." "You're covered in blood." "Not mine." The sentry let him through. Lieutenant Bradford was waiting in his tent, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes hard. "Where the hell have you been, Sergeant?" Cade set down his pack. His knife was still sheathed, still bloody. "Patrol." "Patrol where? You didn't file a route plan." "German positions, northwest sector." Bradford stared at him, at the blood on his uniform, at the exhaustion in his face, at the knife that dripped red onto the tent floor. "What did you do?" "What you ordered me not to do." Silence. Bradford's jaw tightened. "Explain." Cade pulled out his map, laid it on the table, 5 positions marked in red. 12 spotters, 5 radio stations, all eliminated, no shots fired, no Allied casualties. Bradford looked at the map, looked at Cade. "You used the shadow link technique." "Yes, sir." "After I explicitly ordered you not to." "Yes, sir." "Do you understand what you've done? This is insubordination. This is a court-martial offense." Cade met his eyes. "Drummond is still dead. So is Anderson. So are Doherty, Palmieri, Hutchkins. So are the 42 men from Baker Company. I couldn't bring them back, but I could stop more from dying the same way." Bradford opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at the map again, at the 5 marked positions, at the tactical implications. Without those spotters, German artillery would be firing blind. Without accurate coordinates, their shells would be wasted ammunition instead of precision instruments of slaughter. Bradford sat down heavily. "You're confined to camp pending investigation. I'm reporting this up the chain. What happens next isn't my decision." "Yes, sir." "But Hollister." "Sir?" Bradford looked at him for a long moment. "Drummond was my friend too. What you did today, I don't know if it was right, but I understand why you did it." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. I'm still reporting you. Get out of my sight." Cade left the tent. He expected prison, expected dishonorable discharge, expected to spend the rest of the war breaking rocks in a military stockade. What he didn't expect was what happened the next morning. March 15th, 1944. 6:15 a.m. German artillery opened up on the Anzio beachhead with their usual dawn barrage. But something was wrong. The shells fell randomly, scattered across sectors without coordination. No precision, no bracketing, no walking fire that adjusted onto targets. Just blind firing based on pre-sighted coordinates that didn't account for Allied movements during the night. A company moved up to probe Hill 73. No artillery response. They reached the pillbox without taking fire, found Cade's work inside, 2 dead spotters, destroyed radio, silence. By noon, word had spread through the division. Someone had eliminated 5 spotter positions in a single day. Officers didn't know who. Enlisted men started making guesses. By evening, someone had figured it out. The story spread through the ranks like wildfire. Cade Hollister, the scout from Kentucky, the crazy bastard who'd done it alone. At 7:30 p.m., Cade was escorted to division headquarters. He expected court-martial proceedings. Instead, he found himself standing in front of Colonel Garrett Sherman, division intelligence officer, who was studying Cade's map with an expression somewhere between fury and fascination. What Sherman said next would change everything. Colonel Garrett Sherman set down Cade's map and looked up. Sergeant Hollister, 45 years old, career intelligence officer, 23 years in the army. He'd seen soldiers do extraordinary things. He'd seen soldiers do stupid things. What Cade Hollister had done was both. "Yes, sir. You've created a significant problem. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Bradford wants you court-martialed for insubordination. He's not wrong. You violated a direct order. Yes, sir. Sherman leaned back in his chair, studied Cade with eyes that had seen too many men die and too many opportunities wasted. However, he picked up another document, artillery effectiveness reports, numbers and percentages and graphs that told a story. In the 24 hours since you eliminated those spotter positions, German artillery effectiveness has dropped by 63%. 63%, Sergeant. Do you understand what that means? Cade said nothing. It means you've saved more lives in one day than most soldiers save in an entire war. It means that A Company took Hill 73 this morning with 0 casualties. 0. That position has killed 17 men in the past week alone. Sherman set down the report. It also means we need to figure out what the hell to do with you. We can't court-martial you. Morale would collapse if word got out we were punishing the man who just crippled German artillery. But we also can't reward you for flagrant insubordination. So we're going to do something else. Cade waited. You're going to teach your technique, not to scouts, to a specialized unit we're putting together. Men who can do what you did. Get close, eliminate spotters, destroy radio equipment, disappear. Sherman stood up, walked to a map of Italy on the wall. We're calling it deep reconnaissance. You'll train them, lead them, and if they're as effective as you've been, we'll expand the program across the entire Fifth Army. He turned back to Cade. You're not being court-martialed, Sergeant, but the sentence is suspended pending your service with the new unit. Consider it probation with extreme prejudice. You teach soldiers your shadow link technique, you lead missions, and you don't get shot. Those are the terms. Acceptable? Cade nodded. Yes, sir. Good. Report to Captain McAllister tomorrow at 0600. He'll brief you on unit composition. Sir, may I ask a question? Go ahead. Why? Why not just order scouts to do what I did? Why create a whole new unit? Sherman smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. Because what you did requires a specific kind of mind, Hollister. Most scouts can observe and report. Most snipers can shoot and kill. But what you did requires patience and pattern recognition and a willingness to get so close to the enemy that you can hear them talk about their girlfriends before you cut their throats. Not everyone can do that, and not everyone should. Dismissed. The next 6 weeks were brutal. Captain Reese McAllister was a former OSS officer who'd done similar work in North Africa. 35 years old, scars on his hands from interrogations that went wrong, eyes that didn't blink much. He assembled a team of 12 men, scouts, snipers, one former locksmith from Brooklyn who'd been given the choice between the army and prison. The locksmith's name was Finn Calloway, 22 years old, Irish Catholic. Grew up breaking into apartments in Brooklyn to steal jewelry and cash. Got caught. Judge offered him a deal, 5 years in prison or 4 years in the army. Choose. Finn chose the army. Now he stood with 11 other men in a field outside the Anzio perimeter, while Cade Hollister tried to explain something that seemed impossible. Shadow linking isn't about speed, Cade said. It's about timing. You don't rush, you watch. You learn the pattern. Then you move when the pattern creates a gap. If you force it, you die. If you wait for it, you survive. One of the men raised his hand, a sniper from Texas named Warren. What if there is no gap? What if they're always watching? There's always a gap. People can't maintain perfect attention indefinitely. They get tired, they get bored, they get distracted. Your job is to identify when that happens and exploit it. Finn spoke up, Brooklyn accent thick enough to cut. You're talking about reading minds. No, I'm talking about reading behavior. Every person has patterns. When they look left, when they look right, how long they focus before scanning again. You map the pattern. You memorize it. Then you move in the spaces between observations. Like picking a lock, Finn said. Cade looked at him. Exactly like picking a lock. You don't force it. You feel for the pins. You find the right pressure. You wait for the click. Finn grinned. I can do that. Good, because you're going to need to. They trained at night on mock German positions, staffed by division personnel. Cade would position observers with binoculars and radios, then send his trainees to eliminate them without being detected. The first week, everyone got caught. Warren, the sniper from Texas, got spotted 70 yards out. Too impatient, moved during a sweep instead of waiting for the gap. A quiet kid from Oregon named Thompson got caught 40 yards out, made noise, stepping on a branch. Finn got caught 30 yards out, moved too fast, created motion that caught peripheral vision. Cade worked with each of them individually. Warren, you're thinking like a sniper, distance and concealment. But shadow linking requires proximity. You have to get close. That means slower. Thompson, you're focused on where you're going. You need to focus on where they're looking. Map their attention first, then move. Finn, you've got the right instincts from lockpicking, but you're translating speed to movement. In Brooklyn, faster means less chance of getting caught. Here, slower means less chance of being seen. The second week, half got caught. By the third week, a few made it all the way to the target. Finn was one of them. He moved like smoke, like he'd spent his whole life learning to be invisible, which he had. Breaking into Brooklyn apartments required the same skills as shadow linking, just different stakes. Back home, Finn said one night, you get caught picking a lock, cop hits you with a nightstick, maybe you do 6 months. Here, you get caught, German hits you with a bullet, you do forever. Principles the same, don't get caught. By the fourth week, they were succeeding 80% of the time. McAllister watched from a distance, observing, taking notes. One night he pulled Cade aside. They're good. You've got a gift for teaching. I'm just showing them what worked for me. No, you're teaching them how to think. That's different. Most instructors teach mechanics. You're teaching mindset. Because mechanics without mindset gets you killed, they need to understand why shadow linking works, not just how to do it. McAllister nodded. Division wants you operational by late April. They're planning a breakout from Anzio. They want your teams clearing spotter networks before the main push. We'll be ready. I hope so, because if this works, they're going to expand the program. If it fails, they're going to bury it, and probably court-martial you retroactively. No pressure then. McAllister smiled. Just the fate of the entire Fifth Army offensive. Nothing major. By late April, the unit was ready. McAllister briefed them on their first operational mission. April 23rd, 1944. Mission briefing. A German spotter network had been established in the ruins of Cisterna. 4 positions. 8 spotters. Sophisticated radio equipment coordinating artillery fire that was stalling the Allied breakout from Anzio. Division wanted them eliminated before the main offensive kicked off in 48 hours. McAllister laid out the map. 4 positions. We split into 4 pairs. Each pair takes 1 position. Simultaneous strikes at 0230 hours. Destroy radios. Exfiltrate by 0500 before dawn. He pointed to the most exposed position. A bell tower overlooking the main road. Position 1 is the hardest. Open approaches, good sidelines. Hollister, you take it. Cade nodded. I want Calloway with me. Finn looked up. Why me? Because you move like a ghost and you don't panic. I need both. The mission launched at midnight, April 23rd. 4 pairs moved out into darkness. Cade and Finn reached the bell tower at 2:14 a.m. 2 spotters inside, both awake, both scanning sectors with night vision binoculars. They found a position 60 yards out. Watched the pattern. Every 6 minutes, 1 spotter would descend from the upper level to check their supply cache on the ground floor. 30 seconds alone, that was the gap. We take them separately, Cade whispered. You go low when he descends, I go high, 30-second window. What if the timing's off? Then we improvise, but we don't shoot. Gunfire alerts the other positions. No pressure, just the mission. At 2:38 a.m., the first spotter descended. Finn moved, ghosting across the 60 yards in shadow. He reached the ground floor entrance just as the spotter knelt to check the supply cache. 1 hand over the mouth, blade between the ribs, angled up, finding the heart. The spotter died without making a sound. Cade went up the internal stairs, found the second spotter focused on his binoculars, watching the Allied lines. Cade's knife opened his throat from behind. The man never saw who killed him. Both radios were destroyed. By 4:47 a.m., all 4 pairs had reported success. All 4 positions eliminated. 0 shots fired, 0 American casualties, 8 German spotters dead. The Allied offensive launched at dawn. German artillery fired blind. Shells fell randomly. No precision, no coordination. The breakout succeeded. Word spread fast. Division command requested more teams. By May, Cade was training 30 men. By June, the program had expanded to every division in 5th Army. They called them Deep Reconnaissance Sections officially, but everyone knew the real name, Shadow Link Teams. German forces began noticing something disturbing. Their spotter networks were collapsing. Positions that should have been secure were being eliminated overnight. Bodies were found with throats cut, radios destroyed. No evidence of how the attackers had gotten close. German intelligence intercepted Allied communications mentioning shadow tactics and pattern infiltration, but the reports were fragmentary and confusing. On July 8th, a German after-action report filed by a lieutenant described an encounter near Florence. They'd been part of a quick reaction force responding to a missing spotter team. Found the position intact, but abandoned. Radio destroyed. Blood on the floor. No bodies. The report included a chilling detail. No signs of combat. No shell casings. No bullet impacts. Whoever eliminated our observers did so with knives in darkness, without triggering any alarm. Recommend immediate review of security protocols. Current defensive measures are ineffective against this form of infiltration. The report was filed and ignored. German doctrine hadn't changed since the Western Front in 1918. Defensive positions were built to stop frontal assaults, not prevent infiltration by individual soldiers moving in blind spots. By August, German spotter casualties in Italy had reached crisis levels. Artillery effectiveness continued to decline. Back in Allied territory, Cade's teams had become legendary. Soldiers would see them moving through camps at night. Quiet men with knives and blackened faces who didn't talk much and didn't stay long. They'd disappear for days, then return with reports of eliminated positions and destroyed equipment. Casualty rates in their operational sectors dropped by an average of 41%. But success brought scrutiny. September 3rd, 1944. Cade was summoned to Corps headquarters. A brigadier general named Whitfield, fresh from the States with a West Point education and no combat experience, had read the reports on Shadow Link teams and decided they violated the rules of warfare. "These tactics are assassination," Whitfield said, "not combat." Cade stood at attention in front of the general's desk. Captain McAllister was there too, looking uncomfortable. "With respect, sir," McAllister said, "these tactics have saved hundreds of lives." "By encouraging soldiers to murder enemy personnel in their sleep," Whitfield replied. "That's not soldiering, that's butchery." Cade spoke quietly. "German spotters direct artillery fire that kills our men by the dozen. They do it from positions we can't reach with conventional tactics. Shadow linking gets us close enough to stop them. If that's butchery, then I'm a butcher." "But Drummond, Anderson, Dirty, they're still dead because we followed conventional tactics." Whitfield's face reddened. "I don't need a lecture on tactics from a sergeant." "Then don't lecture me on morality, sir. Every man I've killed was killing us first. That's not murder. That's war." The room went silent. McAllister closed his eyes. Cade knew he'd just ended his career. But Whitfield surprised him. The general leaned back in his chair, studied Cade for a long moment. "You're right," he finally said, "and I hate that you're right. War is ugly. Sometimes the ugliest tactics are the most effective. I'm not shutting down your program, Sergeant, but I want clear rules of engagement. Shadow Link teams target spotters, radio operators, and forward observers only. No general infantry, no rear echelon personnel. You kill the men who are directing fire at our troops and nobody else. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good, because if this program starts targeting German cooks and supply clerks, I will shut it down and court-martial everyone involved." These are precision tactics, not a license for indiscriminate killing. Maintain that distinction. Cade maintained it. By the time the Italian campaign ended in May 1945, Shadow Link teams had eliminated over 400 German spotters, destroyed countless radio stations, reduced enemy artillery effectiveness by an estimated 58% across all operational sectors. Conservative estimates credited the program with saving between 800 and 1,200 Allied lives. Cade Hollister received no medal, no commendation, no official recognition. His name appeared in classified after-action reports that remained sealed for 50 years. May 10, 1945, 2 days after Germany surrendered, Cade was discharged from the army with the rank of Staff Sergeant. He took a bus back to Kentucky and returned to Harlan County like nothing had happened. He got a job working construction, then mining again because that was what men did in Harlan County. He married, had 3 children, lived in a house on the same street where he'd grown up. He never talked about the war, not to his wife, not to his kids, not to anyone. The memories were too heavy, the images too vivid, the sounds too loud in his head. Once a year, on March 14th, Cade would get a phone call. Finn Calloway, the locksmith from Brooklyn who'd become one of the best Shadow Link operators in Italy. They'd talk for 10 minutes. Never about the war directly, just about whether they were still alive, still okay, still managing. "You still having the dreams?" Finn asked one year. "Sometimes," Cade said. "Me too. The kid in the olive grove, the one who was talking about his mother. Yeah, every night I see his face, hear his voice. Mutter. Dresden. I know. I got my own ghosts. The German I killed in that bell tower, he was writing a letter when we came in. Never got to finish it." They'd hang up and go back to their lives. The dreams never stopped. Cade would wake up at 2 a.m. with the smell of blood in his nostrils, with the sound of German voices in his ears, with the weight of 12 bodies on his conscience. 12 men he'd killed in 4 hours. 400 more eliminated by teams he'd trained. Necessary deaths. Deaths that saved lives, but still deaths. He carried them quietly, the way men of his generation carried everything, without complaint, without discussion, just steady endurance of weight that couldn't be set down. January 4th, 1987. Cade Hollister died in a hospital in Lexington, 62 years old, heart attack, quick and clean. His obituary in the Harlan Daily Enterprise was 4 paragraphs long. One paragraph mentioned his military service. Mr. Hollister served with distinction in the United States Army during World War II, stationed in Italy with the 3rd Infantry Division. No mention of shadow linking, no mention of 12 spotters eliminated in one day, no mention of the 400 more eliminated by teams he trained. His funeral was attended by 70 people. Finn Calloway flew in from New York. Grey-haired now, hands still steady. Captain McAllister, retired and grey-haired, came from Virginia. A dozen other men Cade had trained showed up without being asked. They stood in the back during the service and didn't say much. After the burial, McAllister approached Cade's widow. "Your husband saved my life," he said. "Probably saved it a dozen times, just wanted you to know that." She nodded. He never talked about it. He wouldn't have. That was Cade. Did the work, came home, moved on. Finn stood at the grave after everyone else had left. Looked down at the fresh earth. "Still having the dreams, brother," he whispered. "Every goddamn night. But we did what needed doing. Hope you found some peace." The dreams were always the same. 12 men, 5 positions, 4 hours. The first spotter's eyes going wide, blue eyes like his father's. The kid in the olive grove talking about his mother in Dresden. The smell of Drummond's blood in a ruined pillbox. Over and over, every night for 42 years. The price of saving lives was living with the lives you took. Cade had paid that price without complaint. Now he was done paying. In 2007, a military historian named David Richardson was researching Italian campaign tactics when he found a reference to specialized reconnaissance sections in a declassified Fifth Army report. The details were sparse but intriguing. Richardson spent 4 years tracking down veterans, reading after-action reports, and piecing together the story of shadow-linked teams. His book, published in 2007, was titled Silent Hunters: Deep Reconnaissance in the Italian Campaign. It dedicated an entire chapter to Cade Hollister and calculated that shadow-linked tactics had reduced Allied casualties in Italy by approximately 11% across the 18-month period they were operational. 11% doesn't sound like much, but in a campaign where 15,000 Americans died, 11% means over 1,600 soldiers who came home instead of dying on Italian hillsides. 1,600 men who got to see their families again. 1,600 men who got to plant apple trees and teach school and work construction and live the quiet, ordinary lives that soldiers fight to preserve. That's Cade Hollister's legacy. Not a medal, not a monument, just 1,600 men who came home. Because a coal miner from Kentucky learned how to move in shadows and taught others to do the same. That's how innovation happens in war, not through committees writing doctrine, through sergeants who watch friends die and refuse to watch anymore. Cade Hollister broke the rules because the rules were killing people. He did what needed doing, paid the price, went home. No medal, no monument, just 1,600 men who came home. The technique was forbidden until it eliminated 5 spotters in 4 hours. Then it became doctrine, and 1,600 families stayed whole. To Staff Sergeant Cade Hollister, 1924 to 1987, and every soldier who proved that sometimes breaking rules saves more lives than following them, we remember.